especially because that tracks with my logic that literally everyone in this book is hot. Like everyone.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Even the baddie bads probably still kind of hot.
Yeah. Yep.
Except for Berwyn. He's the only one. I'm like, he's probably not hot. His name just,
Birkenstock
Berwyn.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Booked on Fantasy podcast.
I'm Addison.
I'm Lorraine, and we are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through book shows and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. We've had some very big reveals about the second Crowland Uprising in the set of chapters, as well as some really interesting questions that arise from the Quest Squad's experiences on an island that has no magic. So, very excited to talk about all this today.
More importantly, Aura Beinhaven, out of there. I am delighted by that. That was my big takeaway from this set of chapters.
She gone a little unfortunate, but she also kind of did it to herself. So I don't know if I feel that bad about it.
No sympathy. She is the master of her own fate, and she mastered it poorly.
As a quick reminder, we are a spoiler-free podcast. We have only read up to the chapters we are covering and no further. So we have no idea what's to come in the rest of the book. With that being said, we will be discussing chapters 19 through 24 specifically, but it is likely that references to the previous chapters as well as Fourth Wing and Iron Flame will come up. If you are not caught up, then definitely stop here and then come back when you are. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have adult conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. If you are reading along with us, then next week's episode will cover chapters 25 through 29. And second, if you are a fan of our Onyx Storm coverage, then the very best way for you to support us is to leave us a review and share it with a friend who loves the Empyrean series.
Recently, we've seen a huge increase in downloads, rating, reviews, as well as texts and DMs. We just want to take a minute to say thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. It truly, truly, truly means so much to us that you take the time out of your day just to even listen, but especially to share or rate or review, or that you want to talk to us. You don't just want to listen to us, you want to talk to us.
No, I totally agree. It's really exciting for us whenever we get emails or text messages, and seeing new ratings and stuff just makes us feel so happy.
I'm literally so happy. If you've been listening for a while, anytime we bring that up and I'm like, I screenshot it and text Lauren immediately, we're not kidding. And we love hearing your theories. We've had more people reach out to us with their thoughts and theories about what we've talked about in the episode or other things. And guys, we genuinely love that. Truly, truly. So Don't stop. And if you haven't, then you should start.
All right, so let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report where Addison will summarize each chapter. And next we will convene a meeting of the assembly where we will deep dive, analyze, and theorize each chapter. And finally, to end the episode, we will share our favorite moments from the set of chapters discussed. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
With absolute delight. Chapter 19. 4 nights later, Grady's selected squad heads to Anca to retrieve the Amelian Citrine. What could possibly go wrong? Basically everything. While Mira, Grady, Henson, and Xaden search for the gem, Violet and Aura are on watch. Aura's jumpy ass mistakes Grady for an enemy and she literally sets him on fire. After that, all hell breaks loose. The town goes up in flames, and the squad runs like hell for the town square so they can mount their dragons and get the hell out of Dodge. Unfortunately for Aura, a wyvern got to her before her dragon could. Oopsies. In an absolutely badass maneuver, Xaden straps Violet to his chest using his shadows while Taryn picks them both up in his claw. But the badassery doesn't stop there. Violet wields in midair and strikes down a wyvern. What remains of the squad makes their way back to Samara, and Mira shows them the gem and the note she found addressed to Lightning Wielder. It was from Theophany. Chapter 20. Back at Vesgaiath, Violet fills her days with classes, reading every single book on Deverelli she can get her hands on and practicing wielding. It's finally time for her to deliver an update to the Senarium. While on the way, Riddick, in a surprising moment of sincerity, insists that Violet take him with her on the quest squad because bad things always happen when they aren't together. Violet agrees and they face the Senarium. Violet loses her shit and flat out refuses the Senarium's proposal and makes her demands instead, including but not limited to getting to pick the members of her squad, which just so happens to be Violet's ex, her current lover, the Quadrant's resident smartass, 2 people who have tried to kill her in the past year, 1 over said current lover, oh, and whatever Dane is. That's our girl! The Senarium reluctantly agrees, and it is decided they will leave for Deverelli the day after tomorrow. Chapter 21. Violet's chosen quest squad makes their way to Viscount Dakaris' palace in Cordon. The crew is exhausted after pushing themselves to the limits for speed and endurance. Barely able to stand, Xaden suddenly uses his shadows to help our girl make her way up the stairs. They prepare to split up and go to their rooms, but not before Xaden prompts Halden to admit that he is there as a duke, which means our favorite couple gets to spend the night together in the same room. But their privacy lasted for approximately 22 seconds before they were interrupted by Viscount Dakaris. Apparently, it is undignified for the Crown Prince of Navarre to be delivered in a basket like a loaf of fresh bread, so Dakaris says he will take Halden on the fastest ship and the riot will follow after getting some rest. Nearly 24 hours later, the riot crosses the border, and not only do they lose their magic, but their ability to communicate with each other. Everyone, that is, except for Violet, Taryn, and Indarna. Chapter 22. The squad arrives in Deverelli, and holy shit, it's hot there. Violet can't help but note how beautiful Deverelli is, but her appreciation is short-lived as she quickly realizes everyone around her, human, dragon, and griffin, are all in distress. All of them are cut off from each other except for Taryn and Indarna. Dakaris greets them and tells them Halden is to meet with the king in a few hours, and until then, the squad should get some rest. Violet notices Xaden looks peaceful? She tells him to come and rest with her, but he declines and says he's gonna enjoy the view for a little while and the reprieve from the lure of the reminder that he can save everyone if he just takes what's offered. That's not ominous at all. Chapter 23. Apparently, our boy Riddick can ride a dragon, but not a horse. The squad makes their way through the beautiful and vibrant streets of the capital city on the hunt for Narelle Anselm. They quickly find out that Narelle Anselm is a dealer of rare books. Who knew it could be that easy? They arrive at the bookstore and ask for Narelle, and her protectors make a hilariously pathetic attempt to take down the squad. Narelle appears and says, "You must be Asher Sorengel's daughter, here to collect the books he wrote for you." Violet's heart stopped, and so did mine. Chapter 24. Books? Plural? As in Violet's dad left her more than one? Did I stutter? Yes, Violet, books. We learned several important things in this chapter, including that Narelle Anselm is a fucking savage. After clearing up that Xaden is in fact not Dane, Narelle tells Violet that she must answer 3 questions before she will give Violet her father's research. The first, an easy layup. The second, an absolutely heart-stopping revelation. And the third, a personal and somehow heartwarming question about Violet's past and present. Violet successfully answers Narelle's questions and is rewarded with the 6 books her father left for her. The bad news, they're all password protected. Damn, why can't anything ever just be easy? I'm so tired of this. Later that afternoon, back at Dakaris' palace, Violet is soaking in the tub when she's interrupted by Xaden, who just so happens to be in nothing but a towel. After being reassured by Violet that she is feeling well, he grabs hold of her waist and his mouth crashes into her. Duke Zaddy Ryerson is tired of being polite. And that concludes the book report.
Wow, what a place to stop.
Oh my God. Well, I didn't stop. No, I'm just kidding. I did. But I mean, what's about to happen. Pretty safe to
pretty
assume.
Implied. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that book report. And now we can get our assembly meeting started for this analysis, starting per usual with our overarching thoughts.
In the last episode, we had a discussion about Grady's assembled squad, and we were wondering how Violet's squad was going to be able to get on the quest squad and how they were going to be integrated into the story. I believe my exact words were, if you think I'm going to read more than 10 pages of Aura fucking Beinhaven, you can get fucked. That's not going to happen. And it's as if my words went straight to Zanal's ears because I got lucky, and that's about all I had to read of Aura before she sealed her own fate. So
that was so crazy. I had a feeling that wasn't going to be the permanent quest squad. What I did not see coming is how she actually just died like that. I was
in the
not
next
expecting
chapter.
That to happen. I know.
Literally in the next chapter. I feel like even Rebecca Yarros was tired of her bullshit. She was like, yeah, you're going to die.
Time to go.
Well, the best and worst part, it's her own fault. She's so focused in blaming all the Erasure writers for all of her problems. And she literally caused her own death and the death of Grady, which R.I.P. man.
She was warned not to do what she did. Fuck around and find out, right?
I was going to say she fucked around and found out the hard way. My next overarching thought is I am so excited about Archer's research. 6 whole freaking books, okay? But I'm going to pump the brakes on everyone's optimism and joy. At the same time, I am a little cautious about getting too excited because they are all password protected. So honestly, I wonder if Violet is going to even be able to get into all of them, let alone read them all, and act on them in the timeline of this book. 6 books is quite a bit. And so I wonder if Rebecca Yarros is going to torture us and drag that out. I feel like it may be one of those, like, one of them is really easy to get into and it's not super helpful, but it's informative, right? But then the next one's harder. And of course, the last one is going to be the most important one that we like can't get into. Or she doesn't get into until the last page and it drops some huge bomb that's like, here's everything you've been wanting to know. And then end of book. That's what I'm worried about. So I'm not getting too excited because I don't trust Rebecca Yarros. And I mean that as lovingly as possible.
No, that's a really good point. I didn't even stop to be like, oh, now there's like 6 new passwords that need to be decoded and unlocked.
And what if they mess them up? I mean, if she gets it wrong,
that's true too, yeah.
She may permanently destroy something super important also. As I said multiple times, ain't nothing can ever be easy, okay? There's always some bullshit around here.
I know, for real. Everything is cryptic. Everything needs to be uncovered.
Mm-hmm.
Everything
no
is
one can
misleading.
just say what they mean.
I know. I will say I was really excited to finally get a little bit more information about the Second Crowland Uprising because obviously that was really important. Also enjoyed, for Xaden's sake, he got a little bit of reprieve from his Veden situation. As much as it sucked for everybody else to not have access to their dragons, I was like, well, at least in this case, he's one less thing to worry about amongst other things that they have to still worry about.
Yeah. Oh, and I bet he's going to enjoy his reprieve quite a bit in the next set of chapters. Hopefully multiple times if we're lucky.
I guess we're going to finally maybe get some full spice scenes here.
Oh, we better.
Instead of like a quarter of a spice scene.
Boo, we're tired of that.
All right, well, let's get into our actual chapter analyses, starting with chapter 19. So, of course, we have the excerpt. This was a passage from chapter 3 of The Canon of the Flyer, and it says that flyers are given a gem upon graduating from Cliffsbane Academy. The gem should always be worn close to the heart, but if personal control is not mastered, then the gem will only amplify the wearer's downfall. We know from chapter 2 and 4th Wing that one of the goods Peromiel is known for are crystalline gems capable of amplifying minor magic. This excerpt adds to specify that these gems are given to their flyers once they graduate, which means Kat, Marin, any other flyers that we met will likely be getting a gem of sorts when they graduate, assuming the series takes us to that point.
Assuming they don't all die before we get there.
Yeah. It also raises several questions. What types of gems does Peromiel have? To what degree and in what way can these gems amplify minor magic? And I also wondered what it meant when it said lack of control can amplify your own downfall. Does this mean it can corrupt you? Or does it mean it will amplify a personal power or trait that is less desirable? Or maybe turn it back on the wearer? There's obviously a lot of questions that arise from there.
I think these are all excellent questions. I also wonder if this is foreshadowing for the fate of some of the flyers we've been introduced to in the series. We only know a few that have graduated, like Kat's sister Serena or Drake. We obviously don't know the timeline of the series, but if some of our characters make it to graduation, maybe this is foreshadowing for them as well. I also wonder if different kinds of gems can amplify different traits or minor magics, and if you can wear more than one gem at a time. Is a citrine different from a sapphire, different from a ruby, different from an emerald, etc.? And finally, can anyone wear these gems? Dragon riders and flyers, or just flyers? Or can even regular old human beings with no magical abilities? We know, as you pointed out, the Duchess of Moraine wears quite a few rubies, and to our knowledge, she doesn't have any magical abilities. So is she wearing them to flaunt, or is she wearing them for a different reason?
I guess just to take like an inventory of gems that have been mentioned. The only ones that I feel like I've picked up on are rubies and then now this Amelian Citrine so far, right? Have there been any other gems that have been mentioned?
Based on memory from the whole series and where we've read to so far, I'm going to say no. Those are the only gems they've specifically mentioned. We know back from 4th Wing that Violet mentions gems in general as an umbrella term, amplify magic.
Right.
But actual like naming of like emeralds or sapphires. No, nothing other than those two.
Okay, so I guess that does beg the question. I don't remember if I said this yet, but what other gems exist? I am also willing to bet that this Amelian Citrine is a magic amplifying gem.
It seems clear based on the increased mention of gems in this book and this excerpt that gems will likely play a larger role as we progress through the series. Now, in what way, what significance, I don't know, but I do feel like this concept is going to continue to evolve as we continue to read.
So it's been 4 days since Violet unlocks the code to her father's research, and now a riot of 8 fly toward Anca outside the woods to retrieve the Amelian Citrine gem. Violet feels the urge to pluck strands of magic from the sky and weave runes, which she believes is because there is more power. But Tiernan informs her that there is less magic, so the pull she feels toward it is actually because she herself grows more powerful every day, more capable of recognizing what once was entirely invisible to you. We will probably bring this up every episode, but I am super curious to see what else Violet can do with her power as she progresses in skill.
This stuck out to me too. I took it as potential foreshadowing for Violet's ability to weave more complex runes because she is getting better at isolating power strands around her. I also wondered if this was perhaps some foreshadowing of her second signet. There is a very popular theory that Violet's second signet is an amplifier. The idea is that Violet is able to amplify people's powers and signets when she's around them, and I wonder if her noticing the power, when in fact there's even less because of the venom, is indicative of that signet. Like she's amplifying the power that's around her. Obviously, we still don't know her second signet, so all theories are still on the table, but that's kind of what it was evocative of to me when I read that.
Oh yeah, that's a great thought. I really hope they all just learn more about runes because for as much as they're mentioned and as powerful as they seem, it doesn't seem like anybody is spending enough time really practicing them, at least as far as we know.
Well, we had this exact conversation in the last episode, and the thing that I can't get over that I keep going back to is the freaking ward stones have runes on them. And the ward stones are arguably one of the most important, powerful, magical objects. And so if that has a rune on it, then maybe we should all
probably study them. Yeah.
Not to mention Colonel Mari's rune stone literally gave people second signets. So that also feels pretty significant in terms of what runes are capable of doing.
Yes. So Andarna wasn't allowed to come with them, but I also thought it was interesting that when Andarna starts arguing about wanting to help with missions because she can burn venom and help Violet, Taryn says, I've told you a dozen times, first fire burns the hottest, which could explain the phenomenon. I wonder if this has some double meaning. Maybe it's not because this was her first time breathing fire, but it has something to do with Andarna's Irid kind being like the original den in some way. I don't know. I'm going to bookmark that in case something comes up from it later.
Oh, absolutely bookmark it because there is no way that is the reason Andarna's fire was able to kill that venom. I'm willing to believe that the first time a dragon breathed fire is the hottest, like world building, sure, that's fine. But I absolutely do not believe that's why. I think it definitely has something to do with the special breed of dragon that she is and whatever special magic she has. I feel like Tyrion's just trying to justify it in his mind, and I'm like, ain't no way.
They reach the limit of the connection with Andarna, and Taryn warns they have 12 hours before Violet will start to feel the pain from the lack of connection to Andarna. A few hours later, they reach Anca, which Violet notes feels a little too easy. And as we see, they definitely should have been more suspicious. You can definitely tell it's eerie there because everything just is drained and dry looking. It's quiet, and you just, as soon as they got there, I was like, ooh, some shit's about to go down. I can feel it.
Yup.
Okay, so if you guys have been listening to our coverage, you've probably picked up on the fact that my brain goes a little crazy sometimes, and I have a lot of conspiracy theories. I'm not typically like a conspiracy theorist in the normal sense of the term, but when it comes to this book, I definitely am.
I can vouch for Lorraine. She is absolutely like one of the most grounded, well-informed people you'll ever meet. But she has kind of turned into like a basement survivalist conspiracy theorist when it comes to the Empyrean series.
No stone unturned.
No stone unturned.
Yeah. So on that note, there was a line that said, the rest follow suit around the withered remains of the clock tower. And something about this scene and the mentioning of a clock tower immediately made me think of Resin at the end of Fourth Wing In some ways, this trip to Anca kind of felt similar to what happened in Resin. I don't know why, but we know the Venin at Resin were heading toward a clock tower, and we learned they were drawn there because there was a box with the lure in it. There was also another building from which Taryn could feel the chest that had the Mari family crest on it that they ended up blowing up to try and kill some of the Venin and Wyvern. And then also in Resin, it was noted that there was a mine entrance. And we know that one of the items Peromial is known for is these gems that are capable of amplifying minor magics. I was just thinking, is that one of the mines from which they were getting gems from? And also, what else is being mined in and around Peromial? The dragons drop off the riders in the village square, and Violet makes another interesting note. She thinks everything feels off, and according to intel, wielding within drained territory isn't just challenging, but it seems to draw Venin. I'm a little confused by this because I don't understand how Venin can feel when someone wields in an area that has already been drained of magic. My best guess is that in a drained area, any magic that is used becomes much easier to detect because there's no other magic to compete with it. I don't know, maybe it just is like a magnet, like they're just always drawn to it no matter where it is.
I think of it like in an area that's low in magic, any use of it is like a beacon. Obviously, Venin are addicts, right? They're addicted to the power. We see this through all of Zayden's exchanges, right? He can constantly feel the pull and tug of power. And so I think they're drawn to any magic that's used, whether it's from the source or from a person. They're especially drawn to it if there's a spike in an area that's low in magic. Sort of like blood in the water with a shark. A shark can smell a little bit of blood from, how many miles away or whatever. And I feel like that analogy is very similar to Venin. They can smell the magic.
Violet checks in on Zayden since they're outside the wards, while the dragons head off for an area of land that hadn't been drained yet. But Violet is also on edge since she didn't trust anyone in this group aside from Mira and Zayden.
Mira and Grady have a brief, intense exchange where Grady says, "And this mission will serve as a trial run for all those that follow." And boy, was he right. On a second reread, this hits so differently knowing what's about to happen. R.I.P. Grady. You put together a bad squad and it cost ya.
Oh, man, yeah. They continue through the streets, which are very narrow, and Violet states ironic that they built these so tight to keep dragons from fitting between them, and yet it's dragons that might save us. So knowing that Navarre and Peromial have been at war for the past 400 years, it would make sense that the streets were built pretty narrow. But I wonder if it was actually more about keeping Wyvern out. But I guess even that is a little bit odd to me because both dragons and wyverns have fire and could easily just crush any of these buildings from landing on them. So I don't know. Probably not important, but something I was thinking about.
Well, that's an excellent point about the wyvern. It's not just to keep dragons out, but I would assume that the Venin have always and will continue to use wyvern because why not? It's a great advantage. Your point about the fire is true. Who cares if they can land? They can light it up. My guess would be it's just to buy the citizens time. Even delaying a Venin or a rider by a few minutes by making them land on the outskirts of town could be the difference between life and death. And that's probably why they've constructed it that way.
Okay, that's a good point. They eventually find the right house, and I thought it was funny when Zayden sarcastically says, "Was the plaque that says home of Amelia first the drifts that gave it away?" And then Grady, Mira, Zayden, and Henson go inside while Violet and Aura stand outside on watch. So Amelia was one of Peromial's first flyers. So then I was like, do you think maybe the Amelian Citrine gem was named after her? And also, was she the first person or the only person to get this gem?
I definitely think it's named after her. I think that's a fair assumption to make. I don't know if the gem itself is significant or just that it has historical significance because it belonged to someone who was one of the first flyers. Either way, it seems like whether historically or magically, it's relevant. Something else I thought was interesting was when Violet thinks, "I shrug and roll my shoulders, trying to dispel the tide of energy pushing against my archive's door. At least that means Taryn has located some undrained land." I pointed this out because this seems like a potentially huge logistical problem and battle for the riders and flyers, especially if they battle outside the wards. If they end up on the ground in a fight and they can only wield if their dragon finds a patch of land that isn't drained, that could cause huge problems for them, especially as the Venin continue to drain larger areas of land.
I hadn't thought about that, but that's a good point.
Because there's lots of descriptions about how, like, oh, there's no power here. That's almost like they're just hopscotching to places of power. And I feel like that could potentially become a larger issue for them, especially if Venin actually get into Navarre and start draining parts of Navarre.
See, I guess this is like the weird thing. So on this continent, the magic comes from the ground, but it's not like you can just pull it from other areas in general. Like, see, this is where I'm getting kind of confused because, for example, if the Venin can feel a source of magic from a drained area, then why can't dragons still pull magic from areas that are not drained? Is that making sense? I don't understand that difference, I guess.
No, I get what you're saying. I don't know how to answer the question either. I don't know enough about the system of magic, like the world building here, to understand what the difference is. I mean, I guess we know that if it has been drained, it is devoid of any and all magical properties and abilities, right? So if they're on a drained patch of land, they have no magic. It's the same as them being in Deverelli. There's no magic there. The well is dry. And so if they're on a patch that's been drained, there's nothing for them to pull from. So that's why they have to stay in an area that isn't.
Okay, so you have to be directly over land that still has magic for you to, like, channel and then be able to wield the magic.
Based on the way this is written, that is what tracks logically for me.
Okay. Interesting.
Interesting.
Kind of confusing. I still have questions about it, but
ignore it for the sake of the plot.
I know. All right. So while they take watch outside, if I didn't already dislike Aura Beinhaven, then I definitely would have now because she messed up this whole freaking mission with her antics.
Oh my god.
Mira shouts that they found the gem, but Jumpy Aura immediately blasts fire toward a door that swings open. Violet tackles her down, but it's too late because Professor Grady is now on fire, and without a water or ice wielder, there is nothing to be done.
When I read this, I was literally like, I honestly thought they were going to get attacked by Venin or Theophany was going to show up or something like that. It did not go how I expected at all. I was literally like, Professor Grady? I mean, I didn't love the man, but I didn't hate him, and I feel like he didn't deserve that.
I get that Aura's scared, and this is one of her first times, I think, out in an environment like this. You know, Violet is like trying to give her tips and settle her a little bit, and Violet has a lot of experience with this now, so she's kind of used to it. But also, I'm like, Aura, you had one job, which was literally not to wield, and she paid for that mistake later, but one job.
One job, and she could not do it. Well, it's especially stupid because even if that was a Venin, her fire would have done absolutely nothing because fire can't kill them unless you're Andarna, but we're going to ignore that. So it would have been much smarter for her to panic and throw an alloy dagger instead. And so even if it was a Venin, she still fucked up and made the wrong choice logistically. And so she just, I mean, useless, totally useless.
Yeah.
Well, listen to me. I'm like a human being, useless. Ooh, this book is hardened me, guys.
Why did you make that decision? Commentary from me sitting on my couch reading this book. Yeah.
Right.
So this blast of fire sets off a chain reaction of burning buildings, and everyone else is forced to wield to protect the group from harm and attempt to control the rapidly growing fire. And we know that this is a pretty difficult situation for Xaden as well. I did find it touching that everyone urges Xaden to stop, but his problem with stopping is because he didn't want everything to burn. He thought he could save it all.
Firefighter Zaddy, I'm here for it. I thought it was interesting that when the bridge starts to crack and it is about to fall on them, it's described, a pulse of blue emits like a mage light and the bridge cracks overhead, splitting in two and falling on either side of us. I was confused by this because I thought Mira's signet was ward extension, so I'm confused on how she was able to do this. I did some research, and based on what I could put together, this is what makes the most logical sense. Mira's signet is technically considered a shield signet, which a shield signet likely allows the rider to create a protective force field around themselves or others, deflecting attacks or energy blasts, essentially acting as a defensive barrier similar to how an actual physical shield would work. We've discussed this many times about how there are nuances to every signet and their capabilities. My guess is that Mira covers the basics of a shield signet and is special because she can extend the quote-unquote shield the wards provide. Because when I read that, I was like, I thought hers was only about wards. So I'm like, how are you stopping a physical bridge from falling on people? And so that was the only way I could come up to logically justify that.
That's funny because, okay, I realized recently that there's a lot of random stuff in this book that I will just accept
Glaze
and not
over.
even think about. Yeah, because I noticed that line too, but in my brain, I was like, oh, it's Mira. I wasn't even like, wait a second, how would that work in regards to her signet? Like, I didn't even, I didn't
That's
even
the
question
thing.
it. And so
This series is just freaking chock full of stuff like that, where you just like
Yes.
glaze right over it. And then like later it becomes really important. You're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And it was right there in front of you on the page the whole time. You have to like literally question every single thing that happens.
No, yeah, I totally agree because Mira's signet, as far as we've known, is about wards and Iron Flame. It developed to allow her to create her own wards, and that was a big deal. And so you're right, creating like a physical shield against physical objects is definitely an expansion and different from what she was previously capable of doing. So.
Well, I had to do a little bit of research. To our knowledge, there's no other characters that have been introduced that are shield signets, but they talk about shield signets. And so I had to do a little bit of logical conclusions and speculations about what we know about the world, about other shield signets and what that means. And so just assume that there's like a base level that all shield signets can do, but Mira is special because she can manipulate the wards. Kind of like Riddick, right? He's a basic ice wielder, but he's special because he can pull water from the air.
True. They race to the square by the clock tower where there is enough room for the dragons to land. And listening to the audiobook gave me so much anxiety. I mean, my heart rate was up. I was stressed because they had to go one at a time. And the wyvern are coming in the meantime. And they get swiped. And I'm just like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh, dude, seriously. Lorraine and I both listen to the audiobooks as well as read the Kindle and like physical copies. This scene was so intense. But to be honest, I wasn't even worried about the wyvern. I was just worried about them all burning to death in the fire because they're basically surrounded. And when Taryn was like, I'm 60 seconds out, I'm like, I thought you were the fastest fucking dragon in the sky. Like, bro, hurry up. How far did you go?
He's doing his best, okay?
No, he's not. He needs to do better. Violet could have burned to death, okay? Ugh. See, I'm stressed thinking about it.
Mira takes off first with Tiny. Aura goes second, but she did not survive, and she gets stabbed by a wyvern talon.
Whoops.
Sigale approaches next, but instead of landing, she continues on to take down another wyvern, leaving Tarn, I am not a horse, a knock, to pick Violet and Zayden up together. I am assuming Captain Henson makes it out, but I don't think her exit was described. So.
It's not, but she does because they want to make her the leader of the squad.
As they're flying out, more wyvern attack, and Violet wields her lightning with a perfectly aimed strike. Before she does, though, I thought it was hilarious that she stops to contemplate wielding while wrapped around Zayden, basically, and Taryn thinks he's been a great deal closer when you wielded.
Okay, so I'm not gonna lie. I was a little slow getting this. In my defense, I was in extreme distress worrying about everyone's fate. So at first I was like, what the fuck does he mean he's been a great deal closer when she's wielded? She's literally strapped to his chest with shadows. And mid-thought, I was like, oh.
Yep.
He's talking about sexy time. I love Darren so much.
He knows too much. Like,
he
imagine
does.
having like a dragon just constantly aware of everything that you do
I would
all the time.
not enjoy that, honestly.
After stopping briefly to properly mount their dragons, the group meets back at Samara 3 hours before the 12-hour limit for separation from Andarna is reached. I do find it a little odd that Pew and Foley were patrolling north when everyone was making their exit and the wyvern were attacking because what were they doing? I'm not going to dwell on it, but I was thinking about it just in case.
I mean, Zayden does basically say that to them when they get back to Samara. They're like, you were needed elsewhere, you know? So it does make you wonder. Honestly,
what were they doing?
I feel like they really were just patrolling and they just were too far to get there in time. But you know what? In this society, I don't trust anyone. So
The good news is Mira did get the thumb-sized Amelian Citrine gem. Bad news is it's cracked, hazy, and smoke-hued. And there was a note left by none other than Theophany herself. And I was like,
Do you think that the gem looks like that because it was drained by Theophany?
no, I just assumed because of the fire. Because everything was like crumbling around them. It says smoke-hued. And so I was like, smoke, fire, you know?
But don't they
But
retrieve it before everything goes up in flames?
yeah, but in the escape process, I mean, maybe, something happened in between. So
Okay. Because I just,
I didn't
when
think
we
too much about it, but who knows?
when we
I
start
mean,
talking about devoid of light and color and all that, I'm like, oh, drain like from a vent. Because citrine is yellow, right?
well, okay, this just does bring up a point that I think needs to be clarified. So we know Peromio gives magic amplifying gems to their flyers. The
Mm-hmm.
Amelian Citrine was worn by one of the first flyers. So
Correct.
then, I mean, you can logically connect the idea that it was probably magic or like a magic amplifier, but it hasn't been explicitly stated that it actually is. So if Theophany drained it, then that means we're running with the idea that it for sure is still
Yeah.
magical, right?
I mean, I would think so, yeah. I don't know how else it would be devoid of its power. See, I don't know. We just don't know enough about how their
Right,
gems are
right,
used to amplify minor magic. Like, over time, do they naturally drain the more you use them? I don't know.
right. I'm just trying to be careful about making assumptions because I like to do that before things are actually told to us. And so,
And then we
you know,
got later in the next episode,
right,
and we're like,
right,
ooh,
right.
that didn't age
Ooh.
well.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to clarify that now before we go any further with it. I'm pretty sure that this thing is, like a magical object of some sort. Anyway, to get back on track, in this note, Theophany makes two interesting points. She says, I want you to come of your own free will, but she can take her if she wanted to. And two, she asks why Violet doesn't ask her for the answers she desperately seeks. And I was like, what? So Penny definitely has been keeping tabs on Violet somehow, which is really scary to think about.
My first thought was that someone in leadership fed that information to Theophany. How
Oh,
else would she have known? We know from Violet's conversation with Jack that it's heavily implied someone in leadership has been a traitor for years and years, as is circumstantially supported by Lilith and Asher's correspondence. Trust no one, trust only Mira. We speculated a lot so far throughout this book that there is a lot more
right.
the Navarran government is hiding. There's a lot more leadership is hiding. And so honestly, my assumption was that someone in leadership fed it to her. And that's how she knew.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I can go with that too. I guess, I mean, again, this is what, as I just talked about making assumptions. This is another one of the things where I was like, how did she know?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that's confirmed. Obviously, that was my thought.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
unless, I just don't know how else she would possibly know unless someone fed her that
That makes
information.
sense. Or maybe it's okay. I'm going to say something a little wild that is unconfirmed. So this is purely speculative, guys. But sometimes I wonder if Theophany's presence in this series is signifying the cyclical nature of something that's happened in the past. Like what Violet's experiencing is a repeat of maybe something that Theophany's already experienced. And so she kind of has this foresight because it's happened before. I mean, so much of this series is about history and how history has changed, and there's all of these things that were kept from everybody. And yet it seems like we have repeated cycles of history. I don't know. That's where my brain was going with that.
I think there's a basic foundation for that. We're getting evidence of like these signets have only manifested at specific times in history. And then you throw in a little
Right.
nature likes all things in balance. And I think the door is open to that. History is repeating itself because of the way magic works in this world.
Right. Anyways, Theophany doesn't state directly what answers she has for Violet, but Violet assumes it's either about Andarna's kind or a cure for the venom. Well, I kind of think it could be both. I will say, though, if there was a cure, why wouldn't Theophany have cured herself? I guess the easy answer is that she's too far venom to want to cure herself. But she also mentions Andarna in their first encounter in chapter 10. So I'm thinking it's more likely that she has information on Andarna's kind rather than a venom cure.
So remember when Violet asked Jack what the cure is, and he gives this whole little speech about how there is no cure because they do not want to be cured? I would assume that's why Theophany wouldn't cure herself if she was able to. I kind of made a joke about this in the last episode. They're immortal, supposedly. They're super powerful. They have signets. They can fly on wyverns. I mean, being a venom doesn't sound too bad. Minus the whole soul part, So, why would they want to be cured? They don't see it as something that needs to be cured, not in the ways that Violet and Xaden do.
Exactly, yeah. I will say overall, though, that Theophany is definitely suspicious. I still can't tell if this is a trap or if she's going to make some sort of exchange where if Violet turns venom, then she'll give her the answers she has or something. I just don't know how you could work together in any capacity with a full-on venom like Theophany and have it end well for you, I guess.
Yep, totally fair. In venom in general, things do not go well when venom are around. I want to know what Theophany meant by I'm capable of taking you whenever I wish. Is she talking about straight up kidnapping or using a manipulation tactic like Xaden or using Taryn and Andarna to bait her? So many questions by what she means by that. I feel like we've just now scratched the surface on Theophany's power and what she's capable of. And as you said, it ain't going to end well. If you tango with Theophany, it ain't going to end well for you.
Too many questions, not enough answers per usual in this book. So, all right, moving on to chapter 20. We have the excerpt, of course, and this was a quote from Papa Sorrengail's research regarding the Second Crowland Uprising. He basically states that denying a rebellion is not as important as only going to war with those you trust implicitly. First of all, the title of his research is Subjugated, the Second Uprising of the Crowland People. I actually didn't know what subjugated means, but when I looked it up, it said to bring under domination or control, especially by conquest. Based on what we learned in this set of chapters, this foreshadows how Deverelli betrayed the Crowland rebels for failing to deliver on their end of the deal that they'd brokered with another unnamed Isle Kingdom. This caused Krovla to remain under Paromish control rather than become independent, and that kind of ties into being subjugated. I also find it interesting that Papa Sorrengail seems to expect rebellions to occur, but implies that if you were going to rebel with help, then you need to be extremely careful with those whose help you seek. I also feel this excerpt can be connected to the excerpt for chapter 21, and perhaps the Tirish Rebellion was a repeat or similar to what happened with the Second Crowland Uprising. This is like a secondary thought for me about connections to the Tirish Rebellion, but I don't think that it's coincidence that there's excerpts related to that coming up amongst this mixture of ones related to the Second Crowland Uprising too.
First, let me just say, damn, I love the excerpts in this series. Well,
yeah.
love-hate. They're just like little puzzle pieces, and I love trying to see how they fit into the story because I feel like they all have meaning. And it's so fun to this one plus this one makes me think X. I don't know. I really enjoyed that. That's a very clever way to introduce information into the story. So hats off to Rebecca Yarros. But second, I also feel overall this excerpt speaks to a broader theme in the series, which, as it states, only go to war with those you trust. You can apply this a little more broadly. In Violet's case, only go on a quest squad mission with those you trust. And the sentiment is echoed shortly in her conversation with Riddick. But in general, I feel like similar to what the excerpt from Lilith to Asher and Asher to Lilith, like Mira and Violet only have each other, trust no one. And I feel like that is a broader theme, is really, truly don't trust anyone or anything except for Mira, Xaden, and hopefully the quest squad.
Everything is suspicious.
Everything. I know it makes me kind of jumpy and anxious. I see why you've become a conspiracy theorist because you never know.
You never do. And there's too many little snippets of things being brought in at different times to where nothing can be ignored. I'm doing a lot of second guessing and questioning a lot of things for reading this book.
My own sanity.
Yeah. So once back at Biscayeth, Violet prepares for a progress update with the Senarium. It's noted that since arriving back, she's read every book on Deverelli Justinia can find, and she's also read books related to Venom in hopes of uncovering something useful for Xaden's case. She's also questioned Jack more, but he offers nothing except information about ASIN progression and how easy it is to channel from the earth.
Violet also notes that Jack won't give up the name of who his sage is or how Theophany could possibly know they'd go for the citrine. It made me wonder if Theophany is potentially Jack's sage and or maven. We don't have confirmation on Theophany's rank, and we do know sometimes mavens will pick up ASIMs. Usually it's a sage. So depending on how the ranks play out, but it did make me wonder if there's a connection between Jack and Theophany.
I think back in the very beginning, well, again, me just making assumptions, I kind of assumed that Jack was because Theophany was present when the Venom were trying to break Jack out. She popped in
that's
briefly and then
true.
she left. And again, as we said, not explicitly confirm that she is. But I think that moment made me just leap and be like, oh, yeah, she was probably there because she's Jack's sage.
Yeah, because why else would she care about just a little ASIM? I don't think Jack's that important to the Venom in the sense of he's that special or anything.
Well, that we know of so far.
Well, you know what?
Violet heads to the Great Hall for her meeting with the Senarium, and she's accompanied by Rhee, Riddick, and Sawyer. First off, Sawyer is making progress with his return to classes, and he has a new metal prosthetic leg, which is really awesome to see.
Yet another tiny thing I was right about, that he would just end up making his own, and it would be way better. So, woohoo!
We also see that Kat is waiting for them with a flyer, and we will be introduced to this flyer very shortly. But the bulk of their conversations centers on Riddick's insistence to join the quest squad, and man, not only was his reasoning amazing, but we also finally get a deeper understanding of Riddick's character, as well as more insight into what his signet can do. I really loved seeing a different part of Riddick because most of the personality we see from him shows his goofy, joking, happy-go-lucky side, but deep down, Riddick is extremely protective and loyal to his squad. He tells Violet that ever since Athbean, when the squad first got separated, he points out every mission after that resulted in something bad happening to her, and he says, I just think bad things happen when we aren't together.
Oh, Riddick! I totally love this as well. I am here for some Riddick character development. You're totally right that up to this point, we've really only seen a goofy, sarcastic side of him, and so it was really nice to see a little more deeper, more profound emotion coming from him.
Riddick tells them, I'm just as good a fighter as any of you. I've been the one reading every book Jasenia shoves at me and spending extra hours training. It really pisses me off when you guys act like my sense of humor lessens my ability to show up for our squad. So, as we just said, this is a really big moment for Riddick's character. And, it actually made me think of that time back in Iron Flame when it was Riddick's comment about how the first 6 kept journals that put them on the path to go find those journals, because he's like, oh yeah, I remember seeing work in Lyra's journals in Lilith's office during war games. And then sure enough, it becomes a really important thing later. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, Riddick, you've been there helping out.
Riddick's like, yeah, I know things, guys. I've got you.
Yeah.
It has only now occurred to me that Riddick's sense of humor is likely just a part of who he is, but it is also probably a coping mechanism for all the horrors and brutality he's witnessed at Beskayeth. I really like that Riddick is, in a loving but firm way, standing up for himself and his capabilities, because I do think that, in general, people who use humor either as a coping mechanism, a shield, or it's just part of their personality, sometimes people do discount them a little because they're, oh, you can't take anything seriously. It kind of, I guess, translates to you must not be smart or serious because you can't take anything seriously. And so I like that he shows you can be funny and smart and hot.
Sure can. Yeah. Last but not least, Riddick reveals he's always been able to draw water out of the air, and that by testing his signet on fruit, he realized he could freeze the water in the fruit. And I was like, oh my God, Riddick. So the implications definitely make Riddick more powerful and deadly than anyone previously thought. Violet even says, are you trying to tell me that you can freeze the water in somebody's body? Plus, there's only a few ice wielders that can even pull water from the air at all. Once again, I am just baffled by the creativity of how signets are written, and it's really cool that Riddick has a stronger manifestation of ice wielding. Could this also mean that Riddick will become one of the strongest ice wielders in this series?
Oh, absolutely. I think it is definitely a strong possibility. Especially when you think about, again, They're like halfway through their second year. So he hasn't even really got to like dig deep into his signet powers. So that's pretty crazy that he can do that. And also terrifying.
Violet remembers her father's words, only go to war with those you trust implicitly, and realizes that Riddick is right. She needs a squad mate as part of her quest squad, so she brings Riddick into the meeting with her.
I love the moment that Riddick hands Violet the orange and she realizes what he's capable of. And she's like, yeah, you're coming with me.
Yeah.
And then she's like, but not because you can potentially freeze someone's blood in their body. It's because of the first point you made. But also the orange thing doesn't hurt. So let's go.
Right. Violet notes that the other flyer Kat brought has a name tag that says Cordella on it as they enter the Great Hall. As a timeline update, it has now been an additional month since the Anca mission, which kind of surprised me because that seems like a long time to pass between that mission and then updating the Senarium. So Violet is kind of thinking about this other flyer, and she wonders if it was Kat's cousin. At that moment, I was like, oh, so this is Drake Cordella, the one who wrote the Venom Compendium that was part of their Venom textbook in chapter 13.
Yes.
So-
Oh, yeah. And Kat was like, my cousin wrote it. And everyone's like, shut up, Kat.
The meeting consists of the usual 6 nobles plus Zayden, Halden, Markham, Atos, then Foley, Henson, and Pugh from the original quest squad that Grady had put together, and a new addition, Captain Jarrett. Violet is also waiting for Mira to arrive at this time. As much as I'm not a fan of Halden, I did appreciate that he dismisses the Duchess of Moraine and allows Riddick to stay in the meeting. The meeting starts and Halden goes on to announce several things. Since they found the Citrine gem, a meeting had been set with King Cortland and command was now transferred to Captain Henson since Grady is now deceased. They were to leave for Deverelli the next day to meet with the king to negotiate an alliance, secure a foothold for expanding the search if we don't find Andarna's kind there, and then report back. In the meantime, Markham and Melgren would search Erasia for any clues they may have missed. Violet immediately protests to Markham and Melgren searching Erasia, as well as this new squad Halden has put together. She counters by stating she'd go to Deverelli, but only with a squad of her choosing, just as Mira arrives to the meeting.
I love when Mira comes in and is like, what did I miss? And Riddick goes, I think Violet's about to lose her shit.
Yeah, she was not happy with how things were going in there.
She'd about had it, yeah.
While I did get a lot of enjoyment out of Violet telling Markham off, I did find it interesting that Markham states searching Erasia is the first logical course of action. It is the only area we have no information on. I'm assuming Markham is referring to the last 6 years since the Tirish Rebellion. They were rebuilding in Erasia, and a lot of that took part without Navarre finding out. Is that how you understood it as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. As far as Navarre was concerned, Erasia was wiped off the map when they burned it to the ground, which also meant there was no Navarrian presence. It's pretty obvious that this is just an attempt to spy on Erasia under the guise of information gathering, which is just bullshit. Nothing changed in Erasia in 6 years. I'm pretty sure there aren't Irids hiding there, or they would know that. So it's just a ploy for them to get Navarrian spies in there and just see what's up.
I did have a couple other ideas for explaining why Markham and Melgren would want to search Erasia. So first, back in chapter 2 of Iron Flame, the excerpt said it is the valley above Ryerson House, heated by natural thermal energy that is its greatest asset. For there lied the original hatching grounds of the Dubmadine line from which 2 of the greatest dragons of our time, Coda and Terran, descend. So then I was thinking maybe they're trying to explore to see or learn more about hatching grounds in that area. And then the other reason I was thinking about is maybe they want to search shit because back in chapter 43 of Iron Flame, while the riders and flyers are crossing the cliffs of Draelar to bring the flyers to Erasia, Terran informs Violet that Erasia's first hatchling has chosen to emerge, which transformed Erasia's valley back into hatching grounds and changes the magic there. But it also, of course, meant Feathertails. I was thinking, is it possible Melgren and Markham somehow found out about that? I don't know. I'm doing a lot of speculating here, but I feel like you're probably mostly right that they just want to spy on Erasia in general.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible they know something we don't. Like there's something hidden in Erasia or something that got left behind and they want to try and retrieve it. That's not out of the realm of possibilities at all. But I think it's safe to at least assume this just a generic, we just want to see what Tyrandor's up to because we don't trust them. Since this is now the second rebellion/revolution they have led.
Yeah, that makes the most sense. Violet is pissed that Markham complains about missing information, and then she points out the irony of that, considering he's hidden centuries of our continent's history from public knowledge. And I was like, touche. But as you all know from our chapters 7 through 12 episode, Markham is on our watch list for being suspicious and potentially a traitor to Navarre.
My previous favorite comeback in the entire series was in Iron Flame after Cat and Violet spar, and she thanks Cat for teaching Xaden the finger trick. But I think this may now have surpassed that. Violet fucking served Markham. Reading this was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Halden steps in and allows Violet to choose a squad for Deverelli. And basically, this is her one shot. And if she is not successful, they will then assign a new commander. And then if she refuses to continue under this new commander, then he threatens to negate the Erasure Accord. Yikes. Not great. Violet selects her draft picks, and we have a new squad. Xaden, Mira, Riddick, Cat, Captain Cordella, Dane, Halden, and whatever favorite guard follows him in case he stubs his toe. I thought it was cool of Violet to let Cat pick a squad member as well because she felt as a flyer she deserved to have someone she could implicitly trust in the group.
I think it's also important to note that if/when they are successful, she reserves the right to change out members of the squad. I do wonder if this means that at some point Rhiannon or Sawyer will go on part of a mission. I think a little bit it kind of depends on where they're going and where the information leads them. But I did want to note that she reserves the right to change out the squads because maybe Cat and Drake won't be needed next time, especially if they're going somewhere in Navarre. But whereas like Rhiannon's signet, super helpful.
Ooh, yeah, that would be cool. I also thought it was very interesting that Violet tells Halden the Tirish kept contact with Deverelli up until the last century, which also surprises Xaden. Timeline-wise, this means Tyrandor was still in contact with Deverelli until around 534-ish AU, and this detail only furthers my suspicion that the Tirish rebellion may have been similar to the Second Crovan Uprising, which then led me to wonder if Deverelli or another Isle kingdom possibly played a part in that, in the Tirish rebellion as well.
I thought it was interesting that Xaden was surprised by this revelation. That implies to me it was a duke prior to his father or his father kept that a secret because Xaden seems pretty knowledgeable in Tirish history. And so even he was like, wait, huh? What?
But wait, that's not the only surprise. It turns out that Xaden's been getting a lot of marriage proposals now that he's Duke of Tyrandor, and the Duchess of Moraine is trying to arrange a marriage for him herself. She can GTFO with that, but it does seem like the Duchess is trying to make a little bit of a power play and extend her bloodline to Tyrandor, as Halden points out. But I guess the point about having an heir is fair, because unless he appoints someone to take over, then it does leave things kind of unstable in Tyrandor and for Navarre, should anything go wrong. And in a universe where you have nobles and royal bloodlines and stuff, then heirs tend to be a really important thing. We also did bring up in a previous episode whether we thought Xaden and Violet would get married. And, I'm starting to see it becoming more of a possibility just to stop outside proposals.
Having an heir seems especially important now because politically everything is so unstable and there are a lot of negotiations happening. So it's really not ideal for any member of the Senarium not to have a secure line. So I can see what their hesitation is. And also, it's harder to negotiate, make decisions when he's not there. I know Llewellyn steps in for him and everything, but I can see why they're hesitant because he's arguably one of the most 6 important people in Navarre. So they kind of need him.
Right. Also, this is just random, but have you noticed that in these Senarium meetings, the noble who chimes in the most is the Duchess of Moraine?
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know. Why is that? And also, why is she in particular so concerned about Tyrandor and its rebellious history if she's also trying to arrange a marriage? That's kind of weird to me.
Why don't you tell me what you think? Tell me your conspiracy.
I don't know what I think about it yet. I'm just noting it because even though all of them are present, we only hear from 2 to 3 of these nobles in these meetings. And I'm like, why is nobody else
Deaconshire,
speaking?
who? Yeah, no, literally. I don't even know if it's a duke or a duchess, honestly. You hear from Xaden, obviously, he's the Duke of Tyrandor. You hear from the Duke of Caldere and the Duchess of Moraine. And everybody else are
Ah.
just like, oh yeah, you're still here? Why?
Yeah, why are they so quiet? I started thinking a little bit more about Tyrandor as well, and I feel like Navarre is probably wary of Tyrandor because there was this detail back in Chapter 2 of Fourth Wing that said had Tyrandor been successful in their secession, it would have left the kingdom defenseless, which does lead me to wonder, what does Tyrandor have that is so critical to the defense of Navarre? They're known for runes. They have ancestral dragon hatching grounds and a ward stone. Is there anything else? What else do they have?
So I had to do some digging for this, but here is what I think. Tyrandor is the largest province and where Bascaeus gets the majority of their army. This is discussed back and forth when they break into Lilith's office. Violet reads a missive on her desk from Lieutenant Colonel Alyssa Trevant, which basically says there's unrest in Tyrandor, and this is problematic because they won't be able to replenish their front lines without the support of the people in Tyrandor. So Tyrandor basically supplies all the bodies for the military, and without them, Navarre is fucked. And that's why Tyrandor is so critical.
That makes sense. Xaden clarifies he took part in a revolution, not a rebellion, but he appoints Llewellyn to speak for him in his absence with counsel from Bodhi and has Garrick take over as professor for Signet sparring class. Ultimately, they decide to depart the next day as scheduled, and the meeting ends. Mira then confronts Violet about her draft picks, and I think this line sums it all up pretty well. She says you get one chance to form your own squad, and you choose your ex, your current lover, and the Quadrant's resident smartass, 2 people who have tried to kill you in the past year, one over said current lover, and whatever Dane is. These are your choices for the most important decision any writer could possibly undertake?
And then Taryn chimes in with the, I'm glad someone said it.
I know.
You know what? Mira and Taryn are not wrong. Honestly, it's not looking like the best choices. I know it all works out, but
Right, yeah.
well, I guess I don't know it all works out. So far, it's been okay, but it is a bit of an odd dynamic when you put it like that.
I do feel like Mira really laid it on her, but I would expect nothing else from her, to be honest. And it seems like Mira and Sigale would be besties because Mira also takes the opportunity to kick Captain Drake Cordella of the Nightwing Flyer's Drift straight in his groin later as well. So
that does seem like a very Sigale-coded move. Mira gives big sister energy so hard. She's so practical and matter-of-fact and always gives Violet a little reality check on her choices. But at the end of the day, trusts her decisions and supports her. And I'm really, really afraid that Mira's going to die because she's too special and too important.
Well, she has a role to play, though, as Narelle tells her later.
Yeah, but what if that role is to sacrifice herself for something like Lilith?
Oh my gosh, don't say things like that. Before the chapter ends, I also thought it was interesting that Mira has been tasked with reading through Lilith's journals. And I want to know what she finds, especially with Narelle's comment later about Lilith's role being to prepare Mira for something specifically. And I do feel like this is one of those times where sometimes I wish we got different POVs outside of just Violet's. But anyways, that ends chapter 20, moving on to chapter 21. Starting with the excerpt, this one was another one from Papa Sorrengail's research, and it discusses how Tyrandor was the last to cut contact with the Isles, and how, as a province, they had a reputation for cunning leadership. Papa Sorrengail notes that this decision in particular was astute.
Just in case anyone needed this, the definition of astute is having or showing an ability to accurately assess situations or people and turn this to one's advantage, which seems like a particularly relevant word choice given the nature of this excerpt.
So as I noted earlier, Tyrandor would have cut contact around 534-ish AU. But Papa Sorrengail's use of the term astute definitely implies to me that I think there was a very strategic reason why they waited to cut contact until the moment that they did. And the fact that it's in his research in relation to Feathertails and the second Crowland uprising also makes me wonder if maybe Feathertails were involved with the Tyrrish rebellion as well. Something about Tyrandor being tied into this makes me feel like there is a lesson to be learned from the second Crowland uprising, or there's something relevant between these events, if that makes sense.
Oh, see, it's interesting you read it that way because I read it like they were astute for maintaining contact with them for as long as they did. I took it more in a positive way, which, I mean, I guess you could read it either way. I think regardless, your point still stands that there's something to learn from the second Crowland uprising, and we need to learn it.
I think both things were true, right? It was astute of them to have had contact with the Isle Kingdoms for whatever their personal reasons were. But then also deciding to cut contact with them when they did was probably also for a very specific reason. Tyrandor, as implied, was clearly very strategic and very smart about whatever they were doing. So I am just really curious about the Isle Kingdoms. They have a direct tie to the Second Crowland Uprising and a former connection to Tyrandor, which attempted to secede almost 200 years later. Also, I keep thinking about this line from chapter 16 of Iron Flame when Violet gets a book called The Unabridged History of the First Six, and she thinks, while it goes into detail about the complex relationships of the First Six and even a little of their battle experience during the Great War, it simply labels the enemy as General Daramore and our allies as the Isle Kingdoms. So in reference to the Isle Kingdoms, if they were allies to Navarre during the Great War, then I'm inclined to believe that they aren't necessarily bad. But then you also have Deverelli brokering deals and like the cryptic notes about how the word is blood and making a deal is law from chapter 23's excerpt. And it just leaves you with a lot of questions about Deverelli and the Isle Kingdoms. With one overnight stop at Appin plus another grueling 24 hours straight of flying, the quest squad arrives in Gordon. The story is to help prepare the Griffins for a journey across the sea, but the real reason is to keep Xaden off the ground outside the wards as much as possible. I did laugh out loud at the fact that Halden is being carried in a basket by the Griffins, and even Takaris was like, he looks like a gift. But I also feel like the dragons are so petty because they easily could have carried the basket and helped the Griffins out, but they were like, nah.
Yes.
We're not going to touch them.
And then Taryn spent the whole time bitching how slow they were. I'm like, okay, they're already slower anyway, and after carrying, Halden and Anna, yeah.
Help them out a little bit,
Rude.
I did like that Taryn doesn't like Halden either, though, when he thinks, I'm suggesting we continue onward with only riders and flyers. Like, leave them behind. But ultimately, Halden is their key to being in Deverelli in the first place, so they are stuck with him for now.
Taryn points out to Violet that once they find the Irids, then only Indarna will matter. I find this tension between the ruling forces of Navarre versus the Empyrean/Indarna, and possibly her family, very interesting. There are frequently comments made like this, that the humans don't rule dragons, blah, blah, blah. But it seems like most of the time the Empyrean just goes along with whatever the humans want. And I do wonder if at some point we're actually going to see a big division between what Navarre tries to enforce and what the Empyrean actually is willing to go along with, especially when it comes to Indarna, if/when we actually discover the seventh breed of Den and whatever secrets that entails. But it really does seem like the dragons just go along with Navarre. And it's like, but why? You're dragons. You can do whatever you want. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good point, though. And again, why do we never hear from the Empyrean? Even though the series is called the Empyrean series? I don't know.
I know, it's starting to get a little sus. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. And Darna makes a comment about the ghosts in the area possibly being superior, like the weather is. And Taryn's comment was kind of interesting to me. He thinks, perhaps you were like Sagal's kind. They favor the warmer climate. And right after that, Violet remembers that the hatching grounds of the blue dragons used to be near Corden before the Great War. I don't know why that's important, but it feels like we'll need to remember that, so I'm a bookmark it for later. But I do feel like this shows that they're kind of on the right track with the Irids, since they are heading to a warmer climate, and Indarna feels more comfortable going that way, so maybe it's a little push in the right direction from that sense. They touch ground in Corden, where Taryn insists leaving the second pack strapped to his saddle. Once again, I love sassy Indarna when she mocks Violet and Taryn, and then Taryn chastises her for putting her tail on the ground. It felt like the dragon equivalent of basic manners.
Oh, yeah, like get your feet off the table kind of thing.
Yeah.
For your listening pleasure, here's my impression of Taryn. Pick your tail up off the ground right now. Where do you think you are? The Vale. I just freaking love Daddy Taryn so much. You can almost hear the sigh of exasperation in his voice just reading that.
Right.
I have 2 children, and so this feels like a very familiar scent to me where you're just like, oh my God. Just his entire set of chapters, he's like, no, don't eat that. Don't put that in your mouth. do not go in the water. I don't know. It's just so cute. It's such a cute dynamic.
The group walks towards Takaris' sprawling palace home, and I also, of course, have to point out that, as if the indignity of riding in a basket wasn't enough, Halden also struggles to get out of it, and then Karen comments, clearly it was common sense that attracted you to the air. He's so sassy.
He just spends all his time insulting Violet and her choices, and it's just so funny.
Zayden makes a quiet joke about sleeping outside in the pit. Riddick and Dane openly gawk at the palace, and Violet fights her achy body to keep walking. And then once the group gets to the top of the steps, Taryn and Indarna take off to go get some food. Once inside, Takaris eagerly greets everyone while Halden informs him of their plan to rest for the day and then continue on to Deverelli. I was a little surprised that Takaris was surprised they'd managed to get the Amelian Citrine gem. It felt like he almost didn't expect them to succeed or something.
See, I picked up on that. I thought it was even weirder that he was surprised when they showed up. Like, what did he expect?
Yeah,
he sent them a
that
missive
too.
explaining how they needed to proceed. I feel like the moment they retrieved the citrine, wouldn't it have just made sense for them to send him a message and say, hey, we got it. We're going to stop by soon. Especially because Takaris was the one who arranged the whole exchange.
Right.
So I feel like he
right.
should be in the loop on the whole thing. So I thought that was a little weird too.
Yeah, something about that whole situation is odd. But in any case, Takaris agrees and begins setting up their accommodations. We learn he has additional security because Corden is one of the only major cities left standing in the south of Peromiel. Violet also notes that this palace won't stand a chance should the Benin venture this far south. Whoever built it had to have known that. It does kind of seem like Takaris has prepared for that possibility. He has a home in Deverelli, and he's well aware of the Benin. But once again, I am still curious as to why the Benin haven't bothered hitting Corden yet. So once they get inside, I also thought it was interesting that Mira looks down at the black pillar barely visible in the level below. And I only mention it because it sticks out relative to all the other pillars and architecture of the palace. The whole building is described as white or white marble, and yet there is this one black pillar in the middle of it somewhere. Takaris informs them they'll have to double up on rooms with flyers in the palace as well, but asks Zayden what his title is for this visit to determine what authority he is visiting on. To prevent Violet from having to walk up another 2 flights of stairs, Zayden baits Halden into clarifying Zayden is here with no authority, thereby clearing him of any rules so he can freely share a room with Violet. And that was actually very smart, I will say.
Smart and funny. You know, Halden was just fucking raging the whole time.
I know. During this discussion scheme thing, there were a couple things that stuck out. So first, Violet mentally asked Taryn if she would still keep her if she crawled up the stairs, but Zayden answers her mentally instead. I think that this is another example of Zayden's growing intrinsic capabilities.
So I'm actually going to have to soft disagree on this one. Remember, she thinks that she sent that down the wrong pathway. Given the condition she's in, I think it is actually possible she did mean to send that to Taryn and sent it to Zayden instead, because she's quite literally about to collapse. It's like you're trying to send a text, you know, like I'm trying to text Lorraine and I text my mom instead.
True.
Now, later, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, there is another instance that I feel like it definitely supports your growing intrinsic theory. But I feel like in this instance, I actually may be willing just to take it on face value.
Maybe.
Lorraine will not.
Yeah,
She takes nothing on face value.
There's just like all these signets and stuff. You're always just on watch, or you're always on alert about everything. And sometimes I just want to be like, can you just tell us, please, so we don't have to keep guessing about all this stuff?
There's no fun in that, Lorraine.
Know.
We wouldn't need a podcast then.
The second thing that stuck out to me, though, is Takaris reminds them of the bargain he tried to offer Violet in Iron Flame for her to play guard dog for him in exchange for a peaceful life in the Isles. And this just confirms to me that he still would like to have Violet as part of his collection of rarities. Third, as Violet points out again, Halden really has a bad temper, which includes swinging fists and knocking anything and everything out of the way. And I could actually see this becoming a problem at some point. He loses his shit at a really bad time and messes something up because of it.
I hadn't thought about that as foreshadowing, but now that you say it, absolutely. Especially knowing we're about to head into a situation that requires very careful diplomacy. does kind
Yeah.
of seem like Halden is primed to fuck that up in a big way.
You think that as a prince, he should have a better reign on his public-facing demeanor, I guess, or like
You
in
would
front of people,
think,
yeah.
but
Zayden ends up carrying Violet into his room, and they have a very sweet little private moment when he says, "I'm done sleeping in a bed that doesn't have you in it." Swoon. Violet is filled with a little bit of hope that he'll be able to trust himself again to touch her, but we also get the other intrinsic-ish feeling moment that we just referred to when Violet thinks, "It feels so right to be in his arms," and Zayden responds out loud, "Because it is." Zayden seems surprised by Violet's suggestion that his signet is growing, but you do have to wonder what's causing what. Is it getting stronger naturally or because he's venom?
this absolutely screams to me that the insignia is expanding. I don't know how it could be anything else. He obviously just read her thought, not her intention, and there is a distinct difference there. Honestly, I think at this point, I'm willing to die in the hill that his signet is expanding and that he can hear thoughts individually. Now, whether it's because he's just naturally getting stronger or because he's venom, that I don't know. I can't die on a hill for that one.
Yeah, who knows? But it's definitely changing for sure. Before they can actually get into anything spicy, they are interrupted by Takaris with a proposal to the whole Halden arriving in a basket situation. Takaris says it's unseemly for royalty, and in a culture that values rare items, shrewd trades, and luxury, he'll never be granted an audience if he is seen as the item being delivered. He proposes he can bring Halden on his fastest ship, which would be a 2-day journey, while the riders and flyers fly separately. They agree to this, and they end up planning for the riders to arrive at his estate about 12 hours after the ship arrives. I did find it interesting that Takaris mentions the shoreline is defended and that the King of Deverelli needs to be warned about the dragons or they can expect to lose them. Seems like the Isles are wary of their dragons. We don't know much about the Isles, but it seems like they've likely been attacked by dragons or the like before based off of a few different details that we get, which we'll talk about as we keep going.
Yeah, I think it's very possible, if not dragons, then wyvern. I also thought when he says defended, I thought he was alluding to the crossbolts the Deverelli have on their shores, which they talk about a little bit in a later chapter.
Takaris also worries about Halden's temper and hopes he doesn't have to worry about Zayden's as well. They discuss the details for the meeting and the loss of magic. Takaris says it will be fascinating to see if your powers reemerge once on land. So this is interesting. The fact that Takaris even asks about this indicates to me that he knows more than he lets on. But he's definitely going to be watching, I think, to see what happens to the riders and dragons in Deverelli. I also got a little bit nervous when Takaris warns, "I may collect rarities, but King Cortland absconds with them. Do not wander from each other. Do not advertise what a rare jewel you are. And at all costs, do not make a deal you cannot keep." Obviously, I was like, is he trying to say that the King of Deverelli is not afraid to just kidnap or steal something or someone?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I think that's what he's saying. Yeah, he just I'm gonna keep you. You're the one.
Okay, so then that definitely feels like foreshadowing for something happening to somebody or something. That makes me very wary of the King of Deverelli, but I also did find it interesting that Takaris refers to Violet as a rare jewel, knowing Promiel is known for these magic amplifying gems. I'm just going to bookmark that for later. I also keyed in on his wording when he says, "Do not make a deal you cannot keep." I definitely feel like that's important, and it's relevant to what Violet gleans from her father's research and talks to Narelle and Selma about later.
I think it may also be foreshadowing for how the negotiations will go with King Cortland. They're going to be faced with a deal they may not be able to keep, but they're just oh, fuck, we gotta make it, and then try to find a way to get out of it. Or they're gonna have to offer up something else that they can actually give, but they don't want to. Basically, everything in this chapter, you'll get the theme as we continue on, is everything seems to be pointing that things with King Cortland are not gonna go well.
Yikes. So almost 24 hours later, the riders and flyers pass over the edge of the coast of Corden, and the effects from their lack of access to magic is immediate. Violet describes it as feeling small, naked even, stripped of the power that's come to not only embolden me over the last year, but define me, while the dragons experience a decrease in strength, with Terra noting we draw on magic for strength and hadn't realized how dependent they truly are.
I thought this was interesting because even though I know the dragons are inherently magical, I never thought about how being in a land without magic would affect them and their abilities. especially things like their strength and speed and their ability to fly at certain altitudes. That was kind of surprising to me, actually.
Shortly after, Taryn hooks Andarna to him, and Violet notes Andarna is suspiciously silent. And then Taryn announces he's lost communication with Sigale and the other dragons and griffins. Interestingly, Violet notes that she can still feel Taryn's bond, but does not mention Andarna's, and also can't feel Xaden's either. I think that distinction and the fact that this occurs after they leave the border of the main continent is definitely important moving into the next chapter. So speaking of the next chapter, moving on to chapter 22. The excerpt in this one was another passage from Papa Sorrengail's research, and through this we learn that previously it was thought Córdan was supplying troops and weaponry for the Second Croblan Uprising. But Papa Sorrengail's research led him to Deverelli instead. He believes that Deverelli brokered the deal for weapons and troops, but didn't necessarily provide them. As we've touched on earlier with this passage, which Isle Kingdom supplied those troops and weapons then? And why did Deverelli care to get involved at all?
Yes, chef's kiss. No notes. Excellent questions. Yeah, I feel like there are many, many questions we can ask, but at its very core, those are the two most important ones.
The quest squad approaches the shores of Deverelli at about 9 a.m., and immediately I found it odd that Violet takes note of the soft green hills behind the beach, which has a perplexing color that reminds her of the last batch of wool when the weaver's dye has lost its potency. It's muted, almost faded, and its lack of color is made obvious by the contrast of the water. And I was like, red flag. Red flag. There's only one instance we know of that causes something to fade or have this like muted color. And do you want to take a guess at what I'm thinking about?
Twin, where have you been? I thought the exact same thing. It immediately reminded me of how Anca was described, which we know the venom drained. When you start talking about muted color or faded, I'm like, yup, that screams venom. Venom touched.
Andarna demands to be let out of her harness, but Taryn refuses until they're out of range of the crossbolts. Violet notes a dozen of them along the long stone wall, complete with shining metallic tips. This is one of many small details we see in these chapters that indicate to me that the city was constructed defensively, and if I had to guess, they've been attacked in the past. Violet also thinks, given this is an isle dedicated to peace, they're certainly prepared for war. So I did a little bit of digging into crossbolts because I feel like I've heard that before, but I couldn't remember exactly when. Some of those mentions come from Fourth Wing. I didn't find any references in Iron Flame to them. One prominent mention was in chapter 21 of Fourth Wing when, during Battle Brief, they discussed the Battle of Gionfar, which took place along the cliffs of Draelor over 600 years ago. And the quote was, "This battle was pivotal to the unification of Navarre, and its impact still affects flight formations to date. It was also particularly important because the stronghold was equipped with the first crossbolt, which proved lethal against dragonkind, and it was one of the final battles where griffins and dragons worked together to defeat the army of the Barons." Later, in chapter 36, right as the events of Resin are unfolding in Fourth Wing, Violet asked Taryn if he had any idea how to kill all the approaching wyvern, and he responds, "The same methods that can kill us." And then Violet says, "I don't have a crossbow handy." Combined with the earlier note about the hills behind the beach looking faded and, muted in color, this is the point where I wondered if Deverelli actually experienced attacks from venom and wyvern at some point. And if venom attacked Deverelli in the past, then you can assume they had a source of magic at some point. Possibly hatching grounds for dragons as well, since that is kind of the main thing that the venom have been trying to get to throughout Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. And then also knowing Papa Sorrengail's research also led them to Deverelli in association with Feathertails. Well, now I'm feeling 90% confident we're going to find Feathertails somewhere in Deverelli or around the Isle Kingdoms.
I completely agree with your assessment. I know we make some wild speculations on this podcast at times, but I feel like this just follows logic. I'll be the first one to be like, this is way out there, but this one tracks a very logical progression for me.
They touched down on the beach in front of Takar's sprawling a 2-story manor, and honestly, this whole scene was hilariously chaotic and simultaneously concerning. Just before we get into that stuff, though, I was kind of surprised to have a dolphin-like creature be mentioned in this series.
Yes!
But I liked it. And I also thought it was funny that, of course, Andarna is eyeing them as possible snacks.
Girl, how she has not accidentally poisoned herself by eating something venomous to dragons. Girl,
I don't know. Everything is a snack to her, so.
Literally everything.
Aside from that, you've got Taryn trying to keep Andarna from eating something she shouldn't or go too far into the water. And then you have Atrum roaring at Riddick, who shouts back that he doesn't understand what he's saying, which then scares off the Deverelli man that had come outside from Deverelli's manor. And it's all just like pure chaos.
I know. And then poor Riddick gets covered in dragon slime too, which yuck. And it's just.
But on a more serious note, we quickly find out that no one else can communicate with their dragons or griffins except Violet, who can still speak to both Taryn and Andarna.
Not only that, but Taryn and Andarna can still communicate with each other as well. None of the other dragons can communicate with one another. So that tells me that the reason they can has to be related to Violet because she's the only common link. Well, no, I guess technically Andarna is a link between whatever. It's probably something to do with Andarna and or Violet. I don't think it has to do with Taryn because Taryn's cut off from scale. But I thought that was interesting too, that it's not just Violet and her dragons, but Taryn and Andarna can as well.
So that point that you made does come up between Violet and Mira as well. And Mira asks, do you think it's because you're bonded to two, or is it Andarna? This is a super interesting question. It's hard to really come to a good conclusion, but we know when they left the shores of the main continent, Violet could still talk to Taryn, but she noted Andarna was suspiciously silent. Violet was able to communicate with Taryn the entire flight, it seems like, but once they arrive in Deverelli, where there is no magic, somehow Andarna comes back into the picture and is now communicating with Violet and Taryn again. We already know that Andarna is different and special as this 7th dragon breed. I'm also not going to rule out the possibility that Andarna chose to stay silent for some reason because she has done that before. For example, when Varys confronts Violet in Chapter 11 of Iron Flame about Andarna's lack of presence for flight maneuvers, and he mentions he knew Papa Sorrengail was doing research on Feathertails, Violet notes that Andarna was silent during that.
I thought her silence was just a choice because she was feeling the effects of what it was like with no magic and she was just in distress. But I like your analysis. The question for me is whether it's because Violet is special or if it's because Andarna is special. Remember, Violet has uniquely spoken to other dragons before, which we know is basically unheard of. For example, she talks to Coda, which is General Melgan's dragon, at the end of Iron Flame. So that also kind of raises some speculative questioning in this regard.
Yeah, I think overall at this time, I ultimately am leaning towards Andarna being the reason they can communicate. This entire search has been about her and her breed potentially being the key to everything. Even if Violet has this rare and super powerful signet, that power still stems from the dragons, who are the magical beings. So I guess because of that, I'm inclined to then think it's Andarna. But this all stands to be seen. We don't know for sure what's actually going on here. Mira seems to be on rune duty now in this book because she also pulls out several leather pouches containing various palm-sized slices of what appears to be lilac-colored quartz. These quartz slides each have different runes tempered into them by Trissa to see if runes would still work in a place without magic. It's noted that Violet takes a sunlight shielding rune with her.
We talked about this in the last episode. However, they never really seem to follow up on this concept, at least in this set of chapters. I'm going to say we sort of get confirmation that they don't actually work already because at the end of this chapter, Xaden tells Violet, let's get her out of the sun because her nose is getting pink, which would imply to me the rune is not protecting her from the sun. But they never actually follow up on what any of the other runes are that Mira has and what their function is and if anyone's actually using them. So I'm hoping we get like a firm confirmation on that because that seems super important for the world building. But I'm going to assume no at this time.
Yeah, that was the conclusion I came to later as well. Takaris comes out to meet everyone and informs them the dragons and griffins would be allowed to hunt in the valleys 3 leagues south and that Holden was set to meet with King Cortland that afternoon. The dragons and griffins take off to go eat, and the squad requests horses so they can go visit the market under the guise of Violet wanting to buy books.
I love the way Taryn shows he cares for Violet. Before he leaves, he says to Violet, do not die while I am gone. Can you imagine leaving for work in the morning and kissing your partner or your kids and being like, have a good day, honey, and don't die while I'm gone?
I know, it's like really intense.
It's very fatalistic.
Takaris agrees as long as they keep a low profile and provides room info before everyone disperses. I thought the moment on the beach between Violet and Xaden was really sweet and also kind of heartbreaking. Violet notes his face is totally relaxed, and then Xaden holds her hand to his heart and says, "There's no magic here, no power, no lure, no taunting reminder that I can save everyone if I just reach for it and take what's offered. It's only peace." First off, this kind of made me tear up because can you imagine just like living with this constant, borderline, insatiable need for power for weeks and weeks, and then finally have some relief from that feeling? He doesn't even have to think about it. And he doesn't have to worry about channeling because he quite literally can't. It's not even an option for him. I really hope that there's some way to cure this. I don't feel really hopeful about that option, but I still am hoping that there is. It is sad that he can't talk to Sigale, as far as we know, but I don't blame him for feeling relieved to not have to worry about the magic aspect in his venomness, if only for a little bit.
Oh, okay. Well, reading the book didn't make me tear, but reading your thoughts about it did. Damn it, Lorraine.
Yeah, it's sad.
Oh, it is. Xaden.
But now we can get to the ominous part of what he said.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
I was like, what do you mean by save everyone if he just reaches for it and take what's offered? Is he referring to the nightmares he has? How would him becoming fully venom save everybody? Is this a prophecy? I don't know. It's alarming for sure.
Oh, dude, absolutely. I was especially alarmed by the phrase, take what's offered. I know this is going to sound stupid, but that's a very venom thing to say. The power isn't offered to anyone. Venom steal the power from the land. So to hear him say, I just have to take what's offered, I'm like, it did not feel good. Did not like it.
Ooh, yeah. Concerning. Okay, so then during this conversation, as we talked about, Xaden notices that Violet's nose is turning pink outside. And of course, it brings up this question of, did the runes actually not work? Or did they have to be activated before they can work? I guess the question is, were they supposed to automatically work?
Oh, yeah.
Or did Violet have
Good
to
question.
do something to get them to work? Or is it because there's no magic, therefore magical runes just cannot work at all?
Mm-hmm.
So the scene ends with Violet thinking about taking Takaris' offer to her back in Iron Flame. One thing I started thinking about is, could Xaden actually stay in a place without magic and not turn more venom? What actually happens to him if he stays without magic? It's not necessarily a cure for him, but I guess it could be like a worst case solution to prevent him from turning venom further.
Yeah, I wondered if this was a little bit of foreshadowing that they're going to find a way to keep him in Deverelli as part of the quote-unquote mission to help him stop from channeling until Violet can find a cure. But it does seem like a potentially good solution, as you said, worst case solution, but it's better than him completely losing his soul. And we haven't really talked about this, but in terms of a cure, is there a point of no return? If Violet finds a cure, is it they can only cure initiates and ASIMs, but once you're a Sage and Maven, it's too late, or can it cure anybody?
Right.
I don't know. And so I think we definitely have a vested interest in keeping Xaden as little venom as possible for a variety of reasons.
So that ends chapter 22. Moving on to chapter 23. The excerpt for this chapter gives us a very major development in the Second Crowland Uprising. On December 13th, 433 AU, the uprising suddenly failed after the foreign forces disappeared and Promish forces killed off all the Crowland rebels in an event that is now called the Midnight Massacre. Papa Sorrengail was not surprised by this happening, but he was surprised to learn that the Crowland rebels were betrayed by Deverelli after the rebels failed to uphold their part of the deal that was brokered. As we already discussed earlier, this was a huge reveal that Deverelli was not supplying the weapons and troops themselves, but was actually the middleman. After learning that Violet believes Krovla promised Feathertails, we are still left with the outstanding question of what did they even want with Feathertails in the first place? Also, I wonder what information Papa Sorrengail was getting that helped him come to this conclusion. How did he piece enough of this together when so much was probably hidden or altered from whatever historical texts and stuff they have in Navarre? And also, when did he start questioning things?
There are so many questions that derive from this, but that is a great question. He was able to figure out a lot considering how much Navarre hides. I mean, obviously, it seems like Archer is pretty brilliant. He's extremely
Right.
knowledgeable. And so he was able to take this giant puzzle piece that's mostly redacted and somehow piece all this together. But it does make you wonder. Something else I took out of this excerpt is when Asher notes there is a saying in Deverelli, the word is the blood. It's been alluded to pretty heavily, if not explicitly stated, that in Deverelli, your word is everything. And if you break it, you're as good as dead. I think this is going to be super important as they try to negotiate a deal with Deverelli. And honestly, is a little bit of ominous foreshadowing for what's to come. That's kind of been the theme of this episode is all signs point to Deverelli bad, and things will go bad there.
Violet, Zeta, Mira, Riddick, Dane, Kat, and Drake all ride into the heart of Matthias, Deverelli's capital city. Violet notes that all the buildings within a mile of the city center are built of stone, and as Zeta and Ryerson said in Iron Flame, stone doesn't burn, which just adds to the little theory that Deverelli was attacked or under threat at some point by a fire-breathing creature. While the others make conversation, Violet notes how Mira has been on extra alert without access to her dragon, and Violet thinks what we really need is a freaking communication rune for the others, if such a thing exists. I found that really interesting. Seems like something that's going to come up again and would be extremely useful for them if they come back to Deverelli in the future or go to other magicless Isle kingdoms.
That's a big if the runes actually work in the Isles. We still don't have confirmation of that yet, as we've discussed. But if they do, I'm wondering if we're going to see all of them start working on useful runes for when they're outside of the borders of magic. Seems like there are a lot of applications that would be extremely useful.
I also thought it was hilarious that everyone looks at Xaden in shock when they're all conversing and just making small talk. And he asks if Violet and Dade rode horses a lot when they were younger, because everyone is like super shocked by his unusually friendly question.
It's not even particularly friendly. It's just like a normal conversation. Like, oh, did you ride a lot when you were younger? You know what I mean? This scene just had me rolling. Like, literally every single person was like, what? What did he just say? And Riddick's like, I'm so glad I got on this horse.
Yeah. Dan answers, we rode whenever our parents' duty stations allowed for it, not the years they were up in Lucerys, of course. So, considering Lilith had journals from Lyra and Warwick in her office, this detail does feel important to remember, because Warwick is from Lucerys. I don't know. Could be a stretch, but I'm gonna note it. They enter into a more crowded part of town full of vendors and merchants. I haven't mentioned this yet, but Deverelli does honestly sound beautiful. It's got these vibrant, novel fruits and flowers and birds and the beach vibe and everything. So it seems nice. I would go visit, I guess.
The people don't seem super nice, to be honest.
Only to Firebringers, but if you're not a Firebringer...
Well, okay.
I'm just a humble tourist, okay? Going to the shores of Deverelli. So I can play with the dolphinum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Swim with the dolphinum. Deverelli dolphinums. I don't remember how she said it.
Yeah. I did also think it was interesting that Violet notes a bolt of shimmering black silk so diaphanous, it's almost silver. And she had seen that at one of the merchant stalls. And I was thinking, is this the famous Deverelli silk?
Oh, yeah, I bet it is. Totally. Yeah, it's a nice little Easter egg there. I thought it was really funny that as Violet is taking in the beauty and vibrancy of the city, Riddick is like, anyone else felt like our home is a completely dreary shithole?
Yep.
I thought this was hilariously relatable. I've been very lucky that I've been able to travel a fair amount within the United States and a few times out of the country. And I swear, every time I go somewhere, I'm like, damn, I picked the ugliest place in the world to live. It's just a concrete jungle, okay? It's just parking garages and highways. And I'm like, what am I doing here? Especially when you go to Europe, because a lot of the big cities there are very historical. And so they just have this kind of like beautiful old world feel. And then you come to America, and of course, we don't have that same history. Our history is rather different in that regard. And so you're just kind of like, look at this 20-year-old industrial park.
That's nice. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of beautiful places in the United States, like a lot, national parks, etc. But I get that feeling when you're like, huh, I live here. I imagine that's how people that live in Hawaii or Alaska feel when they come to, Houston. And they're like, oh, because they're surrounded by this beautiful, like, natural environment. And they're just like, huh. You guys live here on purpose.
Yeah. They pause at a cloth store where Xaden and Dane go inside to ask about Narelle and Sel, while everyone ponders the dramatic change in Xaden's demeanor.
I thought this was a really important note for Xaden's character Drake is in total shock by Zane's behavior and is like, this cannot be the same fucking guy. Which, fair. Xaden is acting totally different. Riddick, once again, showing his sincerity and social emotional intelligence, points out, maybe this is who he could have been if his dad hadn't led a whole rebellion, fucked him over by getting executed, and having him thrown into the quadrant, making him responsible for all the marked ones at the age of, 17? I know we knew all of that, but hearing it said like that, I was like, damn. You kind of forget how young they really all are and how much trauma they've experienced, especially the marked ones. Their parents were literally murdered. And so it's really heartbreaking to hear that. And also, once again, Riddick, socially, emotionally intelligent. And I love Riddick.
Yeah.
He's my second favorite book boyfriend now.
Aw. I know. He's great. I love him a lot. But yeah, it's really true. Xaden does bear a lot of responsibility.
Yes.
And so, I mean, it makes sense that he's not always super friendly with everybody and joking around, because it's like, who has time for that when you literally have to watch out for everybody's life around you?
No, truly. It makes me think way back in Fourth Wing, the famous scene of Violet in the tree when he's having the very first meeting with the marked ones that she overhears. Right. And that kid's like, can you help me with that? I want to go home. And Zane's like, you're done. You're a waste of time. If you're not going to save yourself, I'm not going to save you. And even Bodhi's like, damn, bro, that was kind of mean. And he's like, well, he's had to make tough decisions like that. His entire life has literally been like, live or die. Decide.
Yeah.
It really brings into juxtaposition like how free and calm and peaceful he is here. I want that for Xaden. I want a future where he can be just himself and happy and not have to bear the weight of the world.
Yeah.
Oh, now I'm sad. I made myself sad. Another character note for Violet and Xaden's relationship. Violet thinks, and yet if all of it hadn't happened, would we still be us? Or is the miracle of our relationship the result of a precise combination of tragedies that broke us both so completely that when we collided, we became something entirely new? Which, let me just say, wow, that's a lot of weight to put on a relationship. It does give me pause and make me contemplate the nature of their relationship. But I suppose you could pose this question for any of us in a relationship. What circumstance of our life led us to the person and led us to forge a connection with them? But it does put into perspective sort of the foundation of their relationship.
I don't know. I think there are circumstances that resulted in them being in each other's vicinity. But I like to believe that there's other reasons that
they would have always found their way to each other no matter what.
Maybe.
I'm going to believe that. Ignore it for the sake of the plot.
Yeah. We get another piece of evidence for the idea about Deverelli having a past with fire-breathing creatures when a Deverelli man yells, "Firebringers," at them. And this is the first of many instances that people are yelling this at them. I do still stand by the idea that Deverelli was attacked by Venom and Wyvern and possibly other dragons, but in either case, something definitely went down historically that I'm very curious about. Xaden and Dane come back outside and inform them that Narelle is a dealer of rare books and her store is actually 2 streets up. So, of course, notably, Xaden had given the cloth merchant some sort of gemstone to get the information because he says we don't share a currency, but gemstones seem to speak in every language. And I was like, what gemstone? Do you have other gemstones you haven't told anyone about? And were they magical gemstones that you had? I don't remember there being a mentioning of him getting that. So I was like, where did you get that from?
My best guess would be that because he's officially the Duke of Tyrandor, I would imagine he has access to the wealth of the province, right? I think each province probably has a vault of goodies and treasures that they've collected that are historically significant or relevant, or just in general wealth they've amassed. And so I just thought he just went into the vault of Tyrandor and just grabbed a fistful of rubies, just took them just in case.
I guess that would make sense, yeah. Anyways, they head to the bookshop, which is called Tomes and Tales, and it's a 2-story building made with various shades of gray stone. And unlike the streets below, none of its sides touch the buildings around it. So I've already harped on the fact that I'm getting kind of conspiratorial because of this book. But I couldn't help but notice the gray stones part. So,
girl, I think you're getting a little paranoid. Okay, it's like gray is a color that exists.
That's all I'm gonna say about it, though. Okay, I didn't have anything else to say about it. I'm just noting it. So I will say I miss the old non-Venom Xaden just as much as Violet has when they have a little moment before going into the shop, and he tells her he can still tell what she's thinking because he can read it in every line of her body and especially from her eyes, which frequently almost cause him to mess up on the sparring mat on several occasions.
Leave it to Big Sister Mira to lighten the mood the moment she says, I swear to Amari, you two get 1 inch closer and I'm throwing a bucket of water on you.
Violet, Zeta, Mira, and Dane head into the shop while Riddick, Kat, and Drake stay outside with the horses. I did note that Violet worries about leaving Halden to meet with King Cortland alone yet again. And this combined with Takara's comment about Halden's temper and other mentions of just worrying about Halden, it does make you really think about the possibility that something bad is going to happen. But it is sort of weird that he's going alone and no one else is allowed to be there with him.
That's a really good point. It does seem like potential foreshadowing, especially when you consider the fact that Deverelli and Navarre are not on good terms and have not been for a century plus. So it really feels like they're kind of set up for failure from the very beginning here.
They enter into the shop, which sounds like a book lover's dream, with the floor-to-ceiling windows and all the rows of bookshelves. But they head toward the counter where a salt and pepper-haired woman in her 60s stands flipping through a ledger. This was another scene where I was getting a little anxious because the tone kind of shifts, and then you have these comments about the people in the store taking note of them, and it definitely makes you feel a little bit edgy. So in addition to Crovelish, the people of Deverelli do speak the common tongue, as the woman at the counter points out. I'm guessing that the reason Deverelli speaks Crovelish is because they traded with them for so long, and that's how Takara's got his Deverelli silk, or how they've been brokering deals with Krovla for the Second Krovlan Uprising.
Yeah, it just seems like as a culture, they value knowledge, and knowledge of other languages would be helpful for trade. Because when they finally talk to Narelle and she's like, we're educated here. You know, I speak the common tongue. So
Yes. To get back on track, Violet asked the woman if she knew anyone by the name of Narelle. And directly after that, they get attacked. So 2 assailants charge them with blades, yelling, Firebringers. Zayden kicks out a chair at one man, followed by a dagger, courtesy of Violet, while Mira punches the other assailant in her face. Dane points his blade at the shopkeeper woman and the other customers, and then orders all of the remaining customers to leave the shop.
Honestly, this scene was so funny to me. I love the casual way Zayden was like, no, you're going to stay down. Don't want to fuck up international relations and all that.
Right.
And meanwhile, like, the girl runs to Mira and she's like, if we have to. It's like a gnat flying towards them. She's just like, oh, God, something else I have to deal with.
Yeah. So once they get the people in line, Mira confronts the shopkeeper to ask if she is protecting something or if she really just hates riders. The shopkeeper states only Firebringers in this store looking for Narelle. Right after this, Violet thinks protecting something got it. So that implies the shopkeeper is wary of Firebringers, aka riders. And then based on the next chapter, we know for sure that Lilith and Asher are quote-unquote Firebringers that have come to see Narelle. But I don't think they are the only ones who have come to Deverelli, because Narelle tells them in the next chapter that her grandchildren have been protecting the books from any riders who aren't Violet. So in that case, what other riders have come seeking these books? Was it just regular dragon riders, or is this about the Venom and Wyvern as we've been speculating? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I read it differently in just that it's their duty to protect the books from any Firebringer who wasn't you. So not necessarily that someone has before, but I mean, who knows? At this point, who fucking knows?
They hear the stairs creak, and it's time to meet Narelle. She studies everyone, and then she tells Violet, you must be Asher Sorrengail's daughter, here to collect the books he wrote for you. And I was like, he was ready for her.
Yes, and this is the point in the set of chapters where my soul left my body temporarily, especially when she said books as in plural. I was like, whoa, like what? So, yeah. I want to dig into those. Honestly, I like the sexy. Well, I guess we don't know if it bleeds into sexy time, but it's pretty heavily implied. And, I like that. But I'm like, girl, don't waste that time. Open those books.
I know. Get to reading. What are you doing?
Seriously.
Okay. Moving on to chapter 24. Starting with the excerpt. This is unsent correspondence from Lilith to who I'm assuming Papa Sorrengail. She discusses how Papa Sorrengail died before he could see his plans fully play out and tell Violet everything she needed to know. Lilith also hopes that the bond between their daughters would be strong enough to endure their chosen paths because they'll need each other to survive. I honestly feel like we're just scratching the surface of what Lilith and Asher knew or were working on in general. I think we're going to discover so much more to what they knew.
Oh, absolutely. I would die for some POVs from Asher and Lilith. I also wonder if this correspondence is from a personal journal. There's no way she could have been sending that to Asher because the excerpt references how he's already passed away. So it seems more like a thought that she's expressing in writing as like a processing mechanism. And we know that Violet has Lilith's journals and Mira's now reading them. And so I actually wonder if we're going to get some hot info from Lilith's journals later on.
Ooh, yeah. I do wonder if Lilith's ominous message is in reference to what Violet and Mira will have to do with what they learn from the research and the journals that they've left behind for them. Or if she's referring to the possibility of leadership or other people in Navarre or, I guess anywhere else really coming after Violet now that she's starting to uncover these truths. Either way, it's not feeling great. But to get into the main part of the chapter, I already love Narelle. She gives off wise, no bullshit granny vibes. I thought it was really funny. And I liked when Violet questions about the books, Narelle's like, did I stutter? And then she looks at Xaden and Dane and says, my, the continent does have some fine looking men. But I also love her loyalty to helping Papa Sorrengail when she says, forgive my grandchildren. They took our task of protecting the books from any writers who aren't you a little too seriously. Narelle waves off her daughter from fussing over her, but she also makes some other interesting comments. She tells her daughter, I'm 93, Leona, I'm not dead. Or what is it you Amarallis say? I have not yet met Mel. He's your god of death, is he not? I don't know what Amarallis means. I was thinking perhaps is a term for people on the continent.
Contextually, I think it's safe to say that's what she means, right?
Yeah.
But why is she calling them that? Why is she not calling them Navarrians? To be honest, I'm not really sure either. But because they're talking about the gods, and then honestly, just literally the way the word was spelled, it made me think of the word Amari, who was queen of the gods. I'm not sure how they would be related, but contextually, that's where my mind went. We're talking about gods, and then Amari is Amari, and Amarallis is Amar. So I was just like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
God watch. God watch for this series.
That. I know, God watch. But aside from that, Narelle bringing up Malik is interesting because she also clarifies Deverelli don't worship gods. It's why we're considered the most neutral of the Isles, perfect for trade. What you call gods, we call science. What you call fate, we call coincidence. What you call the divine interventions of love, we call alchemy. Two substances combined to make something entirely new, not unlike what's between the two of you. And then she looks at Xaden and Violet. So the first part of this comment does feed into Deverelli's role, with the Second Crowland Uprising, but also perhaps other events as well, since they seem to trade with many places and people, and if they self-declare as a neutral isle, then that makes sense why they play broker or have been playing broker in past historical events. I also found the part about alchemy to be interesting. In her example, she seems to be referring to the idea of what creates love, I guess. But I do wonder if there's some double meaning that implies there are other things that have been blended or created as well. I don't know exactly what, but I'm gonna bookmark this for later.
I thought the statement was also very evocative of Violet's thought earlier that I mentioned when she's talking about the circumstances that led her and Xaden to be together. She thought, when we collided, we became something entirely new. Which Violet also refers to in her thought. She thinks it's as if she was in my head earlier. And so I just kind of thought all of that was interesting and as a way of description of their relationship.
There's a lot going on right now, but I thought it was hilarious when Narelle thinks Xaden is Dane. Violet gets embarrassed, and then Mira's in the corner snort laughing in the background about it all.
Oh, dude, she's not just snort laughing. She had to go behind a bookshelf to compose herself. And honestly, I cannot say I blame her because that is just too good. It is too good.
Can you imagine if Violet ended up with Dane instead of Xaden?
Yes, because
the trajectory of this relationship.
There's nothing wrong with Dane. Dane is an angel. Well, he's not an angel.
No,
but
I know that, but
Dane is a sweetie pie. But no, you're right. Obviously, it wouldn't work. But
yeah, the clarifications of who is actually who are made. And I did find it interesting that Norel knew of Fen Ryerson when Xaden says he's Xaden Ryerson. Norel mentions your father risked all your lives to hide away his life's work with the sole purpose that you find it, Violet. He left the last of it with me. I keyed in on the part of it, he left the last of it with me. And I started thinking, does that mean there is more research that he stashed in other places for Violet to find? Or does she have all the pieces between his locked research journal and then these books that Norel gives her now?
ooh, that's a really good catch. I did not pick up on that.
How much more research can you find at this point, I guess, but
That's true.
we also learned that Norel had been holding on to Ash's work for almost 4 years, which means he gave it to her about a year before he died. He also instructed her to only give it to Violet if she had attained the intelligence and understanding needed to actually comprehend it. He's putting some
Stipulations.
stipulations. Yeah. Violet quickly realizes that the rarest item she could bring was actually herself, thanks to her scribe mind. And then Norel asks her 3 questions as a test to see if she's worthy of receiving the books.
I want to know what item she hauled there that's in the satchel that she thought was her most valuable possession. They never reveal what it is, but she even thinks like, oh, damn, we hauled this stupid thing all the way here for no reason. And remember when she first gets that missive from Dakaris, and Darna's like,
Darna.
I know to bring, and Taryn's like, I've come to the same conclusion as well. So I want to know what they're talking about.
Hopefully we find out. So the first of Norel's questions asks her to name the manuscript Asher left for her. And this was titled Subjugated, the Second Uprising of the Crowland People. Check. Second question. What is Violet's hypothesis on what caused the Second Crowland Uprising to fall apart? This is where we get all of Violet's thinking process about how she comes to the information that we get. So she starts by stating that the Crowland rebels didn't hold up their end of the deal that Deverelli brokered, but when Norel pushes her further, she goes on to say that she believed the Crowland rebels had failed to deliver dragons.
Bro.
Her evidence stems from Public Notice 433.323, which detailed a failed border breach by the Crowland rebels near the Athbean outpost 2 days before the Midnight Massacre on December 11th of 433 AU. The only other record of this event was from the journal of someone named Colonel Hashby, who, based on the context, was, I believe, the commander of the Athbean outpost at the time. Is that what you figured as well?
Yes.
Okay, so based off of this, I was thinking about why the Krovla rebels would have breached Athbean, and I was wondering if they actually discovered there were Feathertails close by, and that's what made them attempt that, right? And then shortly after that, right, and then they failed in their mission to get Feathertails, which they promised, and then 2 days after that, then all of a sudden the whole uprising fails, you know?
Yeah.
Next, Violet goes into the discussion between her dad and Dane while they studied the event in the past. But before that, she says it was the year Dane was obsessed with Emerald Sea piracy, which Dane states was a big problem in the 5th century. So that definitely seems like it's going to come up again, especially if they ever end up going that way, because Grady wanted to go over in that area. And then we also had that excerpt from chapter 18 about how icy and treacherous it is to cross the Emerald Sea. Plus the whole, the Emerald Sea is largely unexplored situation.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like we've now hit my threshold on the Emerald Sea. Once is an introduction, twice is a coincidence, and 3 times or more is an intention. And now it's just being mentioned too often. Honestly, I'm going to guess that we don't do it in this book, but the next book, definitely.
Ooh. To get back on track, though, Violet recalls that during this study session in the past, Dane was confused about why soldiers would cross into Navarre to get tail feathers. And then Violet had realized that in Crowflish, descriptors follow nouns, and the correct word was actually feathertails. Which again, we're like, So, all in all, Deverelli brokered a deal between the Crowland rebels and an unnamed Isle Kingdom, and they were to provide Feathertails while the Isle Kingdom would provide an army. When the Crovlin rebels failed to provide the said Feathertails, the deal fell through, and the uprising was squashed, leaving Crovla a part of Paromial. So this, of course, leaves many questions. How did Crovla and this other Isle Kingdom learn about Feathertails? What was this unnamed Isle Kingdom? And what were they going to do with the Feathertails if they got them? I did have a thought of wondering if perhaps it was ultimately about finding a way to access magic or something else about Feathertails. I don't know. But anyways, at this point, Dane points out that he believes Violet and then says, one does not just deal in dragons, let alone take babies to isles that don't have magic, not when you risk the wrath of the Empyrean, to which Violet responds, wait until you realize that your dad knows my dad's book has something to do with Feathertails. So with this additional context, it does make it more suspicious as to why Varys and Atos were trying to get this research on Feathertails and the Second Crovlin Uprising. In general, Feathertails are a huge interest to many different parties, it seems like. So Narelle asked her third question, which is what made Violet leave the prince, referring to Halden. And she says, I've never sought a crown. He didn't love me, not in the way I deserve to be loved. And no amount of power is worth staying with someone who doesn't love you. And I was like, oh, I really like that response from Violet. And I have a lot of respect for her, as does Narelle, clearly.
It's also clear from Dane's response that he didn't know, and he asked Violet why she didn't tell him. She says, what were you going to do? Punch out the Crown Prince of Navarre? And then Xaden pops off with, yes, still might. And God, I love Xaden Ryerson. I'm so glad he didn't do anything that gave me the ick in this set of chapters because, man, I love him.
So feeling satisfied with her answers, Narelle agrees to give Violet the books, and it turns out to be 6 tomes in total, each of which are passcode locked. Mira offers to carry them and then asks why her father was so adamant only Violet collect the books, to which Narelle responds, we all have a part to play in what's coming for us. While he was busy raising Violet for this particular mission, your mother was raising you. I wonder what legacy you've inherited. I touched on this earlier, but what was Lilith ultimately preparing Mira for? And also, the use of the word legacy implies to me that there is possibly a longer running history of something for their lineage. I'm assuming something to do with Lilith's family history. Were there other writers on Lilith's side of the family? And if so, what did they do or what do they know? Later that day, the group is back at Takarsa's beachside palace, and while Violet bathes, she briefly wonders whether Halden was back yet and whether he'd secured permission for them to use Deverelli as a home post to visit the other isles or broach the subject of the 7th breed. By this point, I was like, all right, third time mentioned, definitely think something is happening to Halden. I don't know what, but...
Yep. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Once is an introduction, twice is a coincidence, 3 times or more is an intention, so...
something's happening. Xaden walks into the bathroom to check on her recovery, and well, let's just say he's got some plans in mind for her. And his final words to close the chapter are, I'm done being polite, before smashing his mouth into hers. At this point, though, I was like, Edison, how mad are you that we stopped right here?
Lorraine, I mean this so sincerely. I was raging. Okay, I was in an absolute rage. But you know what? That's okay. Just a little treat for the next episode. Okay, so as soon as we log off, I'm going to go listen to the next chapter. Especially because you know they're finally going to get it on all the way because there's no magic here, which means they doesn't have to worry about quote unquote losing control. So you know this is it. This is the full spicy time.
Fingers crossed, everybody.
You can only hope.
Stay tuned for next week. But yeah, anyway, so that officially ends our assembling meeting. And now we just have our favorite moments to share to wrap up this episode. So my first favorite moment, I really liked I didn't like this scene. It was really scary and very anxiety inducing, but I thought it was really cool when Sigale takes down that wyvern, and it's described how she literally climbed its back and then chomped off its wings. And I was like, damn!
Similarly, I love the escape sequence with Violet and Xaden and how Taryn grabs them both, and Violet fucking wields in mid-air, literally only being held by Xaden's shadow, This is definitely a scene I cannot wait to see play out on the TV show.
Ooh, yeah. My next one was from Riddick, of course, and it's very simple, but he said, I kept the inside thoughts inside. Like,
yep, something
great.
we all
Yes.
struggle with. Similarly, my next one is also from Riddick. It's when he says, it really pisses me off when you guys act like my sense of humor somehow lessens my ability to show up for our squad. And I was like, yeah, you tell him, Riddick.
Yes. So my next one was from Taryn, and it's when they're witnessing Holden try to exit the basket, and he gets stuck, and Taryn says, clearly it was common sense that attracted you to the air. And then another one that I liked was from Andarna this time, our sassy one, and she says, perhaps my kind will not be such killjoys. Perhaps they will feast as they see fit. Perhaps they will. And then she gets distracted and she's like, ooh, what is that? You know, she's like raging and then she just like pivots to food, you know?
My next one is from Mira. I love when she tells Violet, you get one chance to form your own squad and you choose your ex, your current lover, the quadrant's resident smartass, 2 people who have tried to kill you in the past year, 1 over said current lover, and whatever Dane is. These are your choices for the most important mission any writer could possibly undertake. And I was like, thank you. Someone had to freaking say it.
She ain't wrong.
She ain't wrong.
My next one was actually from Drake to Mira because he had a couple one-liners in there. And he tells her, do writers get nicknames once they earn their wings? Because I'm pretty sure yours would be Killjoy.
My last one is when they get to Deverelli and they're calling them Firebringers and Riddick says, rude. And then Kat says, and wrong. Some of us just want to fuck with your feelings, not burn your house to the ground.
I don't know what's worse. Well, actually, that's not true. Burning and losing your home would be way worse than having your feelings be fucked with. But
I don't know. I guess it depends on for how long and what feeling specifically. Neither are good. I'll take neither.
Yeah,
I'll take
that's
option
true. Yeah.
C.
But my last one to close out this episode is from Narelle. And it's when she says, the continent have some fine looking men.
And
They
damn,
sure
do
do.
they, right? Especially because that tracks with my logic that literally everyone in this book is hot. Like everyone.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Even the baddie bads probably still kind of hot.
Yeah. Yep.
Except for Berwyn. He's the only one I'm like, he's probably not hot. His name just,
Birkenstock
Berwyn.
Yeah. We're not sure about him.
No.
He seems a little not so great looking. But anyways, okay. So that concludes our episode. And thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Booked on Fantasy podcast. As always, we are so glad you found us. So please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and follow us on Instagram or YouTube to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today.
So stay violent.
And we'll catch you all next week. Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers. Violet and Aura are on watch. Auras. Wow, that's a hard name to say fast. Okay. Zayden or Tannen and Darna or like like Zayden or Tannen. Oh my god. Why can't I say it?
The quest squad touches the quest squad touches. I add an extra word. Okay.
For your listening, okay, really just botched that from the gate.